China's economic rise has been swift and impressive, and it seems a reasonable bet that it'll soon eclipse the US economy in the sense that it will become the world's largest economy. But we still imagine, even faced with that challenge, that Western ideas will continue to dominate. So one of the questions we're asking today is this an illusion? There are some contemporary Chinese thinkers who argue that old Chinese ideas, such as Tianxia, all under heaven, have a greater potential to promote global harmony than Western ideas of the individual. So is the sun setting on Western ideas as well as Western economies? Or is Western thought still essential to growth and progress, including to Chinese growth? And is it already embedded in China's success? Julian.
I think the idea that we're moving from a situation where Western hegemony is a default, it seems undeniable. I mean, the populations are shrinking for a start. I think the Western countries now make up, it's certainly less than 20% of the world's population. I think it may be as little as 10, 15 or something. We've got other powers, other parts of the world which are growing in economic might, and where economic might grows, other kind of forms of soft power tend to follow. But then I don't really want to sort of get sucked into this idea of, Chinese ideas, Western ideas, as though there's sort of this like competition, which region is going to grow. I mean, one thing that's really clear is that the world is now more interconnected than it ever was. And so the whole sort of notion of these sort of hermetically sealed cultures, competing to be number one, hopefully will become less relevant. So I do think we'll see more ideas coming out of not just China, but other parts of the world, a little bit less of a West-dominated conversation here. I don't think it's a matter of, China's inexorable rise and, in that kind of almost zero-sum game way of looking at it. That's all. For now.
We will return to you. Jamie, you're noted as a believer in Western individualism. So
yes.
Can you envisage perhaps a more collective approach from Chinese thinking rising?
I think it will be useful to just be a bit more definite about what we're talking about here. And I'm with you, Julian. I don't care about really are these Western ideas or not, but what are the ideas that are associated with, and they partly caused, I think, the great advances in the West from the time of the Enlightenment and the Industrial Revolution on? I think the key ideas here are, in the area of inquiry, it was a rejection of authority. So the idea that when you want to know what the world's like, there's no place for authority in that area. You can't. It's not up to somebody to tell you what the truth is. You got to find out the truth through empirical methods and so on. And that's a big part of why we've been so progressive in the West. Then in the political sphere, I think there are really two ideas that are important. And again, I'm not saying these are exclusively Western ideas, but one is equality. And what I mean by equality here is that people are born equal in the sense that they're due no legal privilege on account of their birth. And that was an important idea. Of course, not fully realized, but nonetheless it was a principle that we adopted, and it was used to criticize ourselves and to make reforms. The other idea is one to do with individual liberty. So people should be free in various respects, and we've got some basic ideas about the freedoms due to everybody: freedom of association, freedom of expression, in the economic realm, freedom of contract and freedom of exchange and so on. Now these are the ideas that I think are very closely associated with the progress made in the West over recent centuries. Now, China has made a lot of economic progress recently, and it's done it by adopting some of these ideas in the economic sphere. So they've moved from a centrally planned economy to something much more like a market economy, in which you have some of these economic freedoms that we've had in the West for a long time. And there's been a lot of growth on the back of that. So they've adopted modern technologies, and they've entered into global trade, and they've made an enormous amount of progress. They haven't adopted the whole package, though. They haven't got all these, what you might call civil or social or personal liberties enshrined the way we do, freedom of association and expression and so on. And there's a big question, which I don't presume to know the answer to, of whether or not their progress will continue whether what you might call the catch-up progress they've made, will they be able to continue at this rate without those other liberties that we have? And I know some scholars who work on this, and most of them say that they think they're skeptical, but I don't presume to know. Now, to get to the final point, will the progress that China has made mean that we start thinking, okay, their way of doing things might be better, their ideas might be better? Well, partly because the progress they've made has been by adopting elements of our thinking. I don't think so. But I do think that these ideas that I've been talking about are on the decline in the West. I think our commitment to them is eroding, but it's for reasons internal to us. So the idea, a lot of people now believe that these principles that I've discussed are really just a license for the strong in society to push around the weak. Like in an employment contract, freedom of contract and employment, that's just a license from the employer to give the employee a bad deal. Freedom of expression is just a license for the dominant cultural views to be abusive towards people who need to be protected and so on. So these ideas are on the rise, and they're banging up against the general principles that I espoused. And it's an interesting question about whether as these principles fade a little or ameliorated, toned down, however you want to put it, will the West continue to be as progressive as it has been? And we'll have to wait and see.
Thank you. Well, will China's influence on thought match its meteoric rise economically? Not here in the West. I would agree, I think, with the other speakers on that. And there are some different reasons for that. I mean, the note of panic on the one hand and abiding superiority on the other that are embedded in the questions that we've been given to talk about today. I think we don't really need to take either of those as seriously as the tone in which they're posed. Economic success is easy to show. And we have agreed upon measures for it. And the Chinese, while it's success, while it hasn't been in the rather heavily freighted adjective that was used in the blurb for this discussion, it hasn't been relentless. They've actually had some ups and downs and some disasters and mixed results. Nonetheless, it has been something that we cannot possibly fail to see. It has implications for everyone around the globe, and so it's been taken notice of. Chinese ideas, however, or what cultural or philosophical or moral and ethical superiority would look like, or success, or progress, that we don't agree on around the world as easily. And so I think it's going to be very difficult for the Chinese to make claims that can be held up and defended, that what they have to offer to the world is really superior, in some way better. Anyway, cultural and ideational change is something that happens more slowly than certainly the kind of economic change we've seen in the last couple of decades in China. So if China's rise has been relentless, the economic rise, and this is my third reason for thinking that the West is not about to be inundated with a victorious rise of Chinese thinking, so too has relentless has been the drone of hostile attitudes expressed toward the Chinese, warnings in the West continually, especially since the rise of the Communist Party some 70 years ago now, that what China has thought is dangerous, that most ordinary folk that I meet who are not students, as an academic, who are well-meaning, right-thinking people, they think they know what Chinese thought has to offer. I don't know whether they think they learned it from reading newspapers or watching documentaries on television or seeing dramatizations in cinema or reading memoirs of Chinese who had a very bad time in their own culture, but they think they know what Chinese thought leads to, and they don't like it. And so I think we're going to hear a lot of opposition in the West to any pretension on the part of the Chinese that they have answers in the moral and ethical and philosophical realm that we should grasp. That's why I think the much more interesting sphere over which to consider this question about the rise in Chinese thought is in the non-West.
To continue watching this video, click the link in the top left or in the description below. Or visit iai.tv for more debates and talks from the world's leading thinkers on today's biggest ideas.